peace must be our goal and our guide. And all that we strive for as a human family, dignity and hope, progress and prosperity, depends on peace. But peace depends on us.
We welcome the decision by the government to remove sanctions on 2 banks in Zimbabwe. But that is not enough. The entire package of sanctions against Zimbabwe must be removed. The sanctions in Zimbabwe are not playing any useful role. From the American point of view, you are punishing the people of Zimbabwe. You are killing the masses. You have become axis of mass murdering of the people of Zimbabwe. The people of Zimbabwe are being murdered. They are dying because of diseases that they can't treat. Not because they don't have their gold, not because they don't have their diamonds, not because they don't have their minerals, not because they cannot be able to trade, but because you have prohibited them from trading, from utilizing the natural resources given to them by God. I want to call on this day of Eid al-Fitr to call upon, I'm not a Muslim, I'm a Christian, but I pray in the same God that Trump prays. We pray the same God, we respect the same Prophet Muhammad, and the others. But we want to stand at this hour in the area of COVID-19 to give a hope, a gleam of hope for the people of Zimbabwe by lifting sanctions. These sanctions are illegal. European Union has removed the sanctions. Why America is stuck on human rights issue? There is no African country, show me one that can qualify, that says it has pure record of good human rights record. Where is it? Human rights in America are also being trampled on. But no country has refused or has come to stop America from trading with us. It is the question of human rights record that made the International Criminal Court to try to indict America. And the American government said, no way, you can't try any of our persons.
The United States will use any means necessary to protect our citizens and those of our allies from unjust prosecution by this illegitimate court.
Are the people of America more superior than the people of Zimbabwe who die on these sanctions on a daily basis? We call upon President Trump to completely remove the sanctions against Zimbabwe, allow the country to rebuild its capacity to feed its people, allow the country to access its international trade, allow the country to deliver its people the medicine that is needed in COVID-19 and other emergencies that have befallen Zimbabwe. I rest my case, and I will continue to be doing so on a daily basis. That I send you this clip, President Trump, to listen to us. I'm not a Zimbabwean, I'm a Ugandan, but I've fought against these sanctions for more than 20 years. Remove the sanctions. Thank you. God bless.
Good morning, and thank you for joining us. The show is Diplomatic Leaks, and of course today is Tuesday. That means that we shall be looking at a topic that involves the continent, and specifically that touches on Zimbabwe and of course the rest of Africa. My name is Miriam Ogutu, and thank you so much for finding time to join us today. And the topic for the day is, are the NGOs and the opposition parties spared from corruption allegations in Zimbabwe and across the continent? And to help me out in this conversation, we have Saxon Zvina from Zimbabwe. Saxon, good morning.
Good morning, how are you?
I'm very fine. Did I say your name right? How do you say your second name?
Saxon Zvina. You said it correct.
Oh, Vina. So the Z is silent.
Yeah.
Okay, all right.
The V is not silent.
Oh,
yeah.
So it's Vina. All right, good morning, and nice to have you on the show today. And we're also joined by Mr. Munei Savare from London in the UK. Munei, good morning.
Good morning to you, Miriam. Thank you.
All right, and I'm also joined by Douglas Kirimi, coming to us from Meru, for our for our panelists who are outside Kenya, who may not know where that is. It is in the central part of the country there, Highlands. Quite a beautiful place there. Douglas Kirimi, good morning.
Good morning, Miriam. How are you? And good morning to our panelists from Zimbabwe.
Good morning.
Thank you.
Good morning. Nice to have you. And we're also joined by Daniel Wesonga from Nairobi. Daniel, good morning.
Yes, very, very good morning, Miriam Ogutu in Nairobi, Douglas Kirimi, and Comrade Zavari and other comrades from Zimbabwe. Good morning, wherever they are. Our viewers are watching us from.
All right, very
Thank
well.
you. Good morning.
Very well. And a very good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're tuned in, because we know our viewers cut across the globe. So as we wait for the rest of the panelists to join, because I know they will, I'll start with you, Saxon. Are the NGOs and opposition parties spared from corruption allegations in Zimbabwe and indeed across Africa? That is our topic, but also that will be my starting question for us all. So we start with you, Saxon.
They're not spared, or they're actually part of the system that is
Saxon, you might want to fix
let me just give
reception
an
there.
example for NGOs.
We have a problem with the reception.
Pardon?
Your signal is not very clear.
Hello?
Your reception is not very good.
All right, maybe I can come in later.
Are you able to
Okay,
find...
okay.
Okay, yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm changing the position. How far?
Okay, go
How
ahead.
about now?
Better. Go ahead.
Okay. Saying the opposition and the civic society are not spared from the corruption allegations. Let me just highlight on the NGOs. They've got a racist and nationalist employment policies of the international organizations. Most of the top management and the finance operations, even the country reps, are from their parent countries, despite some of them lacking qualified expertise. Very large gaps between the local and the expatriate conditions of service. This is also highlighting the corrupt tendencies of our civic society. The expatriates and the few big nationals generally agree on self-serving policies and report these externally as the developing countries' consensus, because they are benefiting from the system. The percentage of the aid majority goes towards PECs in the salaries, not development. People at the grassroots in the home countries are not involved from the takeoff stage to the conclusion of the project. Policies are designed in variance with the home country's policies. There is lack of sustainability of most projects, and this creates huge gaps which those involved take undue advantage of. The NGOs above abuse and enjoy poverty-related resources, particularly interested in solving the real problem, which is poverty, ignorance, and discrimination. The local NGOs are sidelined and left to receive the leftovers, despite holding the key to sustainability. The educated African is generally failed because the corruption and exploitation is done using our literate people, not the illiterate. Our own graduates in NGOs benefit and collaborate in expropriation of poor and marginalized communities of the resources meant to uplift their lives. For the opposition, we believe that even whenever they've got access like to the local authorities, they've been quite allegations. In Zimbabwe,
all right, Saxon.
Taking place right now.
Saxon,
Yes.
you might want to find a better place for the reception. We seem to have run into some issue there with the signal. And please, if there's somebody who has the show on their device, please mute it so that we don't have the echo.
Okay.
All right. So when you're able to find a better place with reception, I'll come back to you, Saxon. But I've gotten a gist of what you were saying, and that is the exploration, or rather a lot of NGOs from the local areas, especially there in Zimbabwe, you're saying, they're being discriminated upon by even other NGOs from outside, because then they're just given the crowns, but they don't really get the money that is being sent. So there are people who go out there and take advantage of what is happening on the continent, and when they're given monies to come do whatever it is that they're supposed to be doing as NGO, they're not able to do that. And I'll come back to you then. But Munei, the same question here, our topic for the day. Are the NGOs and opposition parties spared from corruption allegations in Africa?
Thank you, Miriam. The answer to that is yes. And it's not just in Africa where they are spared about that, but we will get to that. Let me give a little bit of background to NGOs in Zimbabwe, or a little bit of explanation. As of March 2018, Zimbabwe, which has got a population of less than 15 million, I think about 14.8 million people, with about between 4 and 5 million of those living outside the country, has got over 1,000 NGOs working across the country, some in humanitarian aid, some in service organizations, and others sort of targeting political governance. Now, it's important to get to know how these NGOs are registered in Zimbabwe. So, for the purpose of the discussion, I'm just going to share briefly how NGOs are registered in Zimbabwe, whether there is a legislative nature that protects the country or that governs how they operate. So I'll try to be as quick as I can before I go further into answering or attempting to answer the subject question. So in Zimbabwe, NGOs, are identified by 3 registration types, which is the organizational type, which is called a private voluntary organization. These are called PVQs in short. And PVQs are registered under the Ministry of Labor and Social Services, and they are governed by the Private and Voluntary Organization Act. Now, that means the government has got a capacity or a right to monitor those activities, of those particular NGOs that are registered as such. And as of 2014, Zimbabwe had 993 registered private voluntary organization NGOs. And then the second group is that of trusts. Now, the trusts group is again registered by an act of parliament in Zimbabwe, which is the Deeds Act. It's called the Deeds Registers Act to be specific. These ones are a bit of a problem in the sense that they've got unlimited objectives and under the law. So, and they proved problematic to the government because their scope of operation is limitless. And the government since 2009 has been trying to bring these under the PVO Act so that they can be able to manage and monitor them. The third group is called the universities. These are unregistered NGOs, and they basically operate under common law. Again, it gives a scope of everything and anything goes in their operations. They are basically, they've got a constitution which they present to say, this is how we are going to operate. They've got a membership, the membership varies. And they then decide to operate, but it's basically governed by common law. Then we've got the international NGOs, which as of 2012 constituted 4% of the number of non-governmental organizations operating in Zimbabwe. At that time, it was 93 registered international NGOs, again for the population, which is pretty much less than 15 million. Now, why does this matter? It matters to understand how these NGOs are meant to operate and meant to function. Now, the history of NGOs is not recent in Zimbabwe. We have always had NGOs dating back to the 1930s. Throughout the 1930s into the 70s, most recognized NGOs were trade unions and women's clubs and burial societies to help each other in the community. And then we got independence in 1980. There was a bit of an upsurge of NGOs. We started having more women rights groups, income generating activities, policy and human rights NGOs coming up. In the 1990s again, so another upsurge in a number of NGOs operating in the country. Part of it was because of the economic structure adjustment program the government had embarked on, which left a lot of people unemployed, vulnerable, and NGOs sort of came in to fill in the gap and feed the families and stuff. But it is the turn of the millennium in 2000 that we actually saw a huge upsurge in NGOs coming in to operate in Zimbabwe, including international NGOs. Now, that is not a coincidence, in my opinion. It is by design. Why I say it is by design, we will go back, particularly when we look at international NGOs, and much as we have local NGOs, which Comrade Saxon was referring to earlier on, it is the international NGOs that are problematic. Mm-hmm. So, for example, years ago in the 90s, one of my relatives, they used to work for Save the Children UK. And Saxon is right to say that everything that comes often ends up in the high offices, the administrators of NGOs. I remember at that time, the flat televisions were still coming into fashion, a lot of clothes and stuff. All those things, if you wanted them, you just have to go to my relative's office and their drivers and stuff. They could share all the goodies before they actually decide where they were going in Berengo or Mtorashanga. And we used to ask and say, guys, are you not accountable for this? Are you not going to be caught? Because this is pretty much stealing that you are doing. Mm-hmm. And they're saying we are in charge. So you find that the international organizations themselves, all they do is bring in these resources, give them to local people, local NGOs, and the local NGOs, they are not accountable to that. There's only one case which happened recently with the Amnesty International Zimbabwe when they decided to dismiss someone for misappropriation of funds. But the thing is, it's not just about the Zimbabwe as regards to NGO not being accountable for their corrupt activities and in misappropriation of money and their activities. Even international NGOs, the Oxfams and staff, their chief executives earn more than the Prime Minister of Britain, by far. Even their administrators and so forth. And this is just money that is thrown at them by members of the public to advance what they will be saying goodwill and stuff. But so basically, international NGOs are accountable to no one except themselves. Mm-hmm. Okay, all right. And you do whatever you want with them. Earlier on in my second part, I think I should stop here so that others contribute.
Yes,
we will look at international organizations such as the UK Aid and USA Aid, and I will talk about those ones a little bit more, for the reason that they are part and parcel of the foreign policy of the United States and the United Kingdom.
Okay.
We will also talk about UAID and how NGOs, both international and local ones, are used by the European Union, because the European Union struggles with its foreign policy, and it relies on these NGOs on the ground to formulate its foreign policy, and how that has caused problems for a country such as Zimbabwe and other African countries.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Munei Zavare, there from London. And we're joined by Abigail Mopambi. Abigail, good morning.
A very good morning to you, Miriam. A very good morning to you, colleagues and the viewers across Africa.
All right, I'll let you to just settle down a little bit. I'll come back to you in a short while. We're also joined by Jevan Karanja from Kenya. Jevan, good morning.
Good morning, Miriam, and good morning to our comrades from Zimbabwe, and good morning to the panelists from Kenya. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Miriam.
All right, so Douglas, you were here a bit much earlier, and I don't know what is the situation from what you've heard from our colleagues there from Zimbabwe and indeed from London, and their experience and what they think the NGO is doing, and if at all the NGOs and opposition parties are normally spared when it comes to corruption allegations in the different countries in Africa. What is your view in all this, Douglas?
Thank you, Miriam. The NGOs, as we know them from since 1990s, which was known as the NGO decade, we cannot spare them from corruption allegations because they are largely unregulated, except for Kenya as a case study. I think when the NGOs tried meandering too much into political space, which mostly they do, there was a crampdown on NGOs and their funding and all that. In most cases, if an NGO is given $1,000 or $200,000 to go and do advocacy or civic education or civic engagement for things around Africa, most of these people are not accountable. Like my comrade Munei said, that they are not accountable to anyone. Most of the time, they end up misusing that money and putting it into private use. And most of the time, when these parties are funded and the NGOs are funded, the funding and those people that fund don't necessarily come to look for those people that civic education was done. For example, if you go today in Harare and organize a training for civic education or a civic engagement in some place, let's say in Masvingo, in Zimbabwe, there is no way the people that have funded you have a way of checking and getting you to get accountable or holding you accountable for the monies that they have funded you. Most of NGOs where they get spared from corruption allegations is where they keep talking and also putting a front as anti-corruption crusaders. And when they put that front is when now they get time to eat in good. That is when they get time to misuse resources. Whereas they were supposed to do civic education, let's say across the country, they'll go do in a few places and take pictures and send them to their donors and all that. So most of the governments in Africa, when they regulate NGOs, they're on the right track. For example, let's use it here in Kenya. There's a conversation going on BBI. And when they raise these concerns, which are very varied from any Kenyan, because every process can have people that are having a consensus on this side. There are people who are also having a different view of this. These people would get resources to go and oppose this document, suggesting better solutions, which are not going to see the light of the day. Who is going to get them accountable? For example, opposition parties in Africa, when they are funded, and let's say to a tune of $100 million, who is going to check and see the opposition leaders took that money and campaigned in the strongholds of the government of the day? Who is going to get them to account for every penny? For example, the late president of Ghana, John Jerry Rawlings, accused his own party, the NDC, of buying houses immediately after they lost the election in 2016. How did the opposition get the money to go? How did the people, where we are today? In Zimbabwe, there was a memo that was leaked to the public from the office of the Prime Minister. Is it the office of the Prime Minister or what? In the UK. They were funding opposition secretly to get Mugabe out of power. In the morning, they'll be singing with Mugabe. In the evening, they'll be funding the NGOs to be able to remove Mugabe in power. And there was no accountability for that money. So when that memo came out, then people would realize, have these parties been receiving this money from the government of UK and so many other sources that are not declared? So Miriam, in my opinion, like my comrade Munei was saying, there is no way we can be able to spare these parties and NGOs from corruption aggregations in Africa.
All right, very well. Thank you so much. So, Daniel, what has come out from the panelists who have spoken there is the lack of accountability when it comes to the NGOs. So what are the dangers of NGOs when they cannot be held to account?
Yes, Miriam, in this dispensation, you have to realize that NGOs control a lot of money globally. And as per the report that came out in 2016, world over, the NGOs are controlling close to $16 billion US. And a single US, that is World Vision, was controlling an amount of close to $1 billion US. That is a massive amount of money. And of course, when you look on the spectrum on which the NGOs operate, it's organizations that operate in regions, majority regions, which are facing some kind of instability. Some are in chaos, and we have a lot of anarchy across the countries that these NGOs are majorly based. And those are the places where we have a majority of them actually. So when you find that an NGO is going to a country that do not have very strong structures of governance, then it is even very difficult to implement laws and measures that will curb corruption, not only in the NGOs themselves, but also in the local leadership. So therefore, that gives a very, very conducive breeding ground for corruption to thrive. And Miriam, in 2008, there's a France organization which is called Médecins du Monde, which conducted a survey about corruption in NGOs. And surprisingly, out of 17 NGOs that were contacted to give their report on the mechanism that they have set internally to ensure that there is no corruption in the usage of their monies and their conduct, it emerged that 11 of them turned down that invitation, and only 6 participated. And for the 6 that participated in this kind of research, they agreed that corruption is indeed a very, very pertinent issues in the affairs of how NGOs are being run, because we've had cases like in Afghanistan where some NGOs were denied entry into the country, and they had to go through Pakistan, of course, parting with a very good amount of money in terms of bribes and all that. We've also had cases where NGOs have been involved in sexual misconduct. We've had cases where key leaders of mission in NGOs have been accused of embezzling funds which were meant for humanitarian mission across the world. So therefore, Miriam, it tells you that some of these NGOs are running without any mechanism of ensuring that we have checks and balances. And this is because they fear that if any case of corruption within an organization is brought into the public limelight and into the media, it will give it negative publicity, and therefore it will make the government focus to be quite overwhelmingly on them. And this will also discourage those who contribute the monies to these organizations not to do so. So it is for this fear of the repercussions about corruption that most NGOs are not quite willing to come out into the limelight and be able to publish reports on their search and on their determination of how prudent they are able to spend their revenues in their mission. So I agree with the rest of the panelists that indeed, for countries where we don't have quite well elaborated laws on how the NGOs spend and on how they operate, we have a very, very high likelihood that a majority of them do engage in corruption activities, and that is a matter that need to be checked, because you find that some of these activities will actually affect the way governments run. And some have been used to advance ulterior motives such as regime change and sabotage the governments of the day. So it's a very, very pivotal issue to discuss about this matter of corruption among NGOs, in as much as many establishments will give it a blind eye, Miriam. I submit.
Thank you so much. And Jevan, we've seen, of course, NGOs and opposition parties, even in our country here, usually when there are corruption allegations against the governments, they are the ones on the forefront, with the evidence and all that, and whistleblowing and calling out government on its own corruption. But we've not seen that much, especially when it comes to the NGO. And I know in Kenya we have laws that regulate the operations and the running of NGOs in this country. But I don't know if the laws are reaching into the activities and the internal workings of the NGOs, different NGOs that we have here in the country. And of course, I don't remember the opposition here in the country anytime being accused of corruption as much as the government has been, and we've seen that it's just what happens across the world. So do you think from this approach and what we've been seeing and the manner in which these things have been happening there, the oppositions and NGO, even when they are also involved in corruption, and of course they're supposed to be providing checks and balances to the government, but also they lack their own accountability, and also they're largely unregulated in how they run, especially the NGOs, how they run the activities, and so they're not accountable. And what are the dangers that comes with an accountable NGO in a country, especially if it's a foreign sponsored?
Yeah, Miriam, we must agree, and I'm in agreement with what my fellow panelists have said. And Miriam, one thing that we must agree is that there is no accountability in the NGOs, most of them, because they get funded from foreign countries. And when they get home in our African countries, there is nobody to check on how they use their money. And Miriam, they find themselves with a lot of money, and they don't know what exactly they are supposed to do with the money. And they end up doing contrarily to maybe what their sponsors were supposed to achieve. And Miriam, they end up doing all manner of publicity against the government of the day. And you have asked a very good question. What are the dangers of that unregulated NGOs, especially in our African context? One thing they do, they go and they have this money and they engage in illicit kind of activities that taint the government of the day in bad image. And this will make the people in that particular country believe that their country, their government, the government of the day is not working to fulfill the promises that they elected them to do. They might be right, maybe, but at the end of the day, they are not doing it from a point of honest or a point of transparency. Therefore, they end up bringing regime changes. And that is why, Miriam, you will find that NGOs are likely and most likely to work with the opposition. They have a tendency of bringing the opposition on board, because when they team up, they form a very credible force. that can even change the regime of the day. And the Miriam, in order for that kind of a change to happen, they must use languages, they must use advocacy that will bring and the people of a particular nation to rise against the government. And Miriam, when such kind of things happen, it is not easy because they might also end up going into the street. They might end up engaging with the police, which is and having that kind of beating up from the police and so on. Therefore, they create that kind of an environment. And at the end of the day, the investors in a particular nation, they end up freeing to their nation. And this brings the government in a very awkward situation. And Miriam, at the end of the day, because of this thing of portraying and painting NGOs as a very good organization, I'm not saying they are bad, but they end up also coming as a solution offer. They come also after bringing all those kind of changes and so on. They also come to bring sanity. They pretend to bring a kind of a harmony among the government and the opposing parties. Miriam, that is how they even get working with the government of the day. And that is why they ensure that they bring all those kind of division. That, to me, I feel that is the dangerous part of having unregulated NGOs, Miriam, because Miriam, when money factor enters into all these into these activities of the NGO, that is the end of it all. And I think the best that we can do is to have a regulated and laws that are quite implemented to ensure that we have NGOs in our countries that serve the purpose they are intended to do. Miriam, we have good NGOs that advocate for good governance, that advocate for human rights upholding, and such good things and virtues in the community. Those ones, we should uphold them and continue making them even to be more vibrant. But those ones that come to create aminosity, to create divisions, those come to paint and to chase the investors out of the nation, and to make even the government and its opposition to be in chaos. Those kind of NGOs, those are the ones that we are condemning. And at the end of the day, Miriam, we must also ensure that we have bodies that counter-check and balance what the NGOs are doing in a particular country, Miriam. We should have an independent body that should be given a mandate, not only of regulating and registering the NGOs, but also to ensure that there is accountability, they check on what they do, so that they manage and to ensure that they don't engage in activities that will make the government of the day or the people of a particular country to be in chaos or to rise against each other, Miriam.
All right.
Thank you.
Very well said. Jevan Karanja there from Nanyuki, some parts of Kenya just outside of Nairobi, which is the capital. Abigail Mupambi, good morning.
A very good morning to you.
And I know you've been listening to what everybody else had to say. When you look at the situation, when it comes to the NGOs and also the opposition parties, do you feel as if they get away, especially with corruption, as compared to the government?
Thank you so very much. What I can basically say is that I will comment not only as an NGO leader, but also as a general citizen, a Pan-Africanist. Look here, we have a situation, we have local NGOs and international NGOs who are mainly the sole funders of the local NGOs. And the local NGOs are expected, in most cases, they report most of what they are doing to the funder, who are the developmental partners, some of them mainly the international NGOs. So the issue at play here is that the funder controls, and the agenda at play is defined by the funder. So this is where the mistake is, because in most of our NGOs in Africa, the whole of my life I've been in the NGO world as a local NGO leader, leading various of them. We hardly have a situation when a proposal is developed proposal. So the donor defines the terms and the kind of project which they want to fund. So they actually define, for example, in Zimbabwe, 2020 will be funding a funder. If there is no genuine abduction, it means either one way or the other you abduct yourself or you create a scenario so that you suit the funder. But the whole idea here is that the funder has got the final result which they want. To some extent, even the NGO leaders at local level, they might not even be aware of the final goals. Most in cases, you find that they are also now involved in the regime change agendas. So the whole issue here, it will be like the local NGO is pushing for this issue, but it's not the real issue. The local NGOs is trying to satisfy the call for proposal so that they are able to meet the requirements. For example, I remember in 2018-2019, there was massive funding for victims of rape cases, rape victims, the girl child. So we realized that during the famous January 14 protests, we got so many women grouped and testifying that I've been raped by a soldier and I've been raped by a policeman. And you wonder whether a policeman produces an ID before raping. So the issue here is that the donors, the funders, the NGO leaders will be creating scenarios to suit the call for proposal. Because these donors, they don't come to address our issues. They will bring a template in the form of a call for proposal. They will declare that there is 200,000 USD on the table for victims of abductions. So what do I do as a vulnerable civic leader on the ground? I'll run around. If I get one abduction, I will need to fake the next one so that they've qualified, they suit the template. So we are found trapped in between a hard surface and a big rock. So now for us to bring the issue forward now, it will be difficult for me to say, to justify that I have been trying to fake, because I will lose the money. So we want as Africa to introspect this. The regulation framework for NGOs has to be clear. It has to be defined by the lead countries. Because in every nation, it should be the nation and the government that sets the agenda. And then invite civic society and NGOs as developmental complements. So it shouldn't be vice versa, that governments are chasing the agenda to suit the agenda of NGOs. That's an error. Governments must set the agenda and the tone of development in any country. Then civic society and NGOs, they must come to complement. So it means they come to suit and close the gaps in every community. But this is not the case in this case. So we want to redefine ourselves as local NGOs so that we have the ground to know what is indeed our position, so that we are able to say no to something and say yes to something. Then the Pan-Africanism agenda comes in. Do we know who we are? Do we all know what we want to achieve as a people and as civil society leaders?
Thank you so much.
So coming to corruption, Miriam.
Yes.
Miriam.
Yes, go ahead. Yes, go ahead.
Coming to corruption, a quick one.
Go ahead.
Yes,
yes.
The civic society and the opposition are not spared of corruption. Let me show you the relationship between opposition politics and civic society, in particular in Zimbabwe. During the 1998 food riots and human rights uprisings, it is then when the organizations like Zim Rights and ZCTU pushed for the formation of an opposition. This is when we started to have the formation of MDC. So there is a mother-to-child relationship between the civic society movement and the opposition politics. So, like they say, children take after their parents. So the opposition and civic society who are actually trapped in corruption allegations are also found wanting. At the moment, we have got organizations right on the limelight, Zim Rights here in Zimbabwe, You Zimbabwe, ERC, and others. Clearly, ahead of 2018 elections, some of these funders, the USAID, came out open. They were suffocated at some point. They had also to make it clear that the NGOs are looting. But the problem is that they can't cry more because they've got this partnership in crime between the international and the local NGO. So they say it, but they don't say it much. But when they feel that they've been suffocated, they sometimes expose each other. We have got individuals, I can go, the list is endless. Mfundo Mlilo, from the Combined Harare Residents Association. We have got Washington Katema, a former USAID employee. These are the very leaders who are leading right now in the movement to call government to account. Honestly, how do you see that workable? You are also a perpetrator and you are in the lead to calling others. So I think this is the situation we find ourselves in, and we need to do something. And of course, we need to understand first what position, what dilemma are we faced with at the moment. Thank you, Miriam.
Thank you so much, Abigail Mupambi there from Harare, Zimbabwe. We are also joined by, before you come in, Mr. Budai, we are joined by Alexia. Alexia, good morning. All right. As
Alcatraz.
Sorry?
Alcatraz.
Okay.
I think Alcatraz is the name of the phone.
Okay, so when they're ready to join, they will join, or maybe they just want to watch and follow and they do not want to participate, but in case they do, they will send me a message there, will raise their hand somewhere there through a button, and I'll see, and then we shall continue with our conversation. So Saxon, I know you've been listening to what everybody else has been saying. I don't know, the donors, as Mpambi there has said, Abigail, they come and they set and run the agenda despite of what they're supposed to be complementing and the needs of the community or the things that have been highlighted that they're supposed to be coming in and helping out. Instead, they come with their own agenda and they set it and they run it, and so the local NGOs must work within those frameworks. And so the local NGOs, because they need that money, they're forced to even act in dubious and corrupt ways in order to get the funding and in order to dance to the tune of these funders. What do you make of that?
Most of these international organizations, like Mr. Mane said, they are tools of foreign policy. And I think you understand that most of the proliferation of these NGOs started after the end of the Cold War. These were meant to destabilize nations which were pro-communists. And they're saving an agenda for the West, mostly. You can understand why there is a disparity in terms of even salaries. Those which are from the international parent organizations are paid well, and they know that their funds are not accountable. They can be used for subversive activities. That's why they don't raise a red flag as far as corruption is concerned. But they know they've got a nefarious agenda that they want to use the funding for. They are not accountable to anyone, and they do that purposefully.
All right. Very well. Mr. Monet Savary from London, you wanted to illustrate to us how the connection and how, institutions or NGOs like USAID, UKAID, and all of these international NGOs that have a very strong footing here in the African continent, how they're used, especially as tools of foreign policy. I guess they come and gather information and whatever it is, and they work on behalf of their governments. And do African leaders know the main purpose of some of these NGOs and the interest that they have in the continent? And if so, why have they been given a lot of room to just do their legwork here in the continent?
Okay. Do African leaders know? The majority do know in most cases. But it is also because in some instances, the NGOs sort of cover for their incompetence, cover for their inability to take care of the local population.
Mm-hmm.
So NGOs, they will bring in a template saying that we're going to support you with your health system, with your education system. So if you see in a lot of countries in Africa right now, including Zimbabwe, the health system, in fact, the vice president recently said so about 3-4 weeks ago, that actually the situation we are in is a serious security issue for us in Zimbabwe, because our health system is funded by donors, international donors, and that is a huge problem. It's the same in education. You look at the education that is given in Africa or in Zimbabwe, for example. By and large, there are a lot of things that are NGO driven, because NGO is funding the school budget and putting money in there. They put their things. Now, this becomes a different side of NGOs. You will see NGOs such as Oxfam, World Vision, Transparency International kind of pushing in that. Then you got the regime change agenda NGOs, international NGOs such as USAID, UKAID. And let me start explaining on those ones. I think I explained earlier on about the European Union, for example, having a serious structural weakness as regards to foreign policy. So what it then does is it cedes the responsibility to gather information, because for a country or for an institution such as supernatural institution such as the EU to come up with a foreign policy, you need intelligence on the ground. Yeah, you need people who collect information and feed back to policymakers, and then policymakers decide. The EU is structurally weak on that aspect. It basically relies on member countries who have got their own interest as well. So what does it do? It uses NGOs to collect information, to collect data, whether they are going to have a policy on Arab-Israel relations, Zimbabwe, and so forth. They use these NGOs. But it is the UKAID and USAID that I will discuss with you a little bit more. But before I get to that, I want to acknowledge Abigail Mpampi, what she said about NGOs in Zimbabwe and the formation of the MDC. Now, as far back as 1994, some people may not know this, but the German embassy was involved in the plans and the formation of an opposition party to ZANU-PF. They tried all the other small parties and it didn't work. So what did they do? Eventually, they identified the ZCTU, the Zimbabwe Congress of Trade Union, as a potential vehicle to form an opposition party to Zimbabwe. So what did the German embassy do? As they often do, they bring in attachés. So they brought in an attaché who was funded by Frederick Ebert Foundation and the Westminster Foundation, which is in the UK. The Frederick Ebert Foundation is in Germany. They funded Lovemore Maduku. They funded Morgan Tsvangirai. Morgan Tsvangirai's first house in Strathaven was bought by money donated by the Westminster Foundation. The same with Lovemore Maduku, who went on to form the National Constitutional Assembly, demanding that we need to change the constitution and so forth and so forth. These were all funded through the German embassy and were trained by Secret Service. This is the aspect that a lot of African countries take for granted. The Secret Service, particularly in Zimbabwe, has got huge activities, especially the CIA and the MI6. They've always had, even during the War of Independence, they always participated in there. And they come in under various, a cover. NGOs is one of them. If you want to see how dangerous they are, look at what they were doing in Ethiopia in the 1980s when there was the Ethiopian War. A lot of money and guns were sent through USAID. Yeah. They could smuggle in foodstuffs beneath that. And one of my university tutors long back who was also a journalist, Linda Pullman, speaks quite, has written extensively about these activities. But of course, she focuses more on Sierra Leone, how, the UK government and so forth were bringing in guns under the disguise